Hello folks, welcome to Solar Power International. How is everybody today?
Great.
How many people are excited that this event's in Orlando? Yeah, how cool is that? That is cool. My name is Bill Ballagher, and I'm going to be your host and moderator today, and it's my great pleasure to have some super guests. And we've got a little bit of a program going on here, and one of the most exciting things for me, of course, is going to be the question and answers at the end, and I hope everyone will participate in that. First of all, I would like to introduce our panel, Mr. Patrick Sheehan, Director, Office of Energy, Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Good welcome for Patrick. Mr. Joe Pietrzak, Senior Manager of Progress Energy. Mr. Bruce Kershner, Executive Director of the Florida Solar Energy Industries Association. Okay. Okay, we're going to talk about today our goals is we're going to go back and collect a little bit of history, Florida's solar energy history. Then we're going to talk about the current state of solar in Florida. Then we're going to discuss the steps necessary for Florida to assume its rightful role as America's leader in solar energy development and deployment. I think we'll all agree that this is a sunshine state, and that's where we want to be. Everyone good with that? Yeah. Good. Let's talk a little bit about the history. First of all, there's a lot of people out there today that are wondering why I'm up here, okay? I'm going to show you a little bit about that briefly. You'll be able to understand a little bit about it. We're going to talk about the history. In the 1950s, over 40,000 solar water heaters were in use in South Florida. How many people knew that? Show of hands. Okay, just a few, okay? Then the 1970s came around. There was an oil embargo, gas lines, energy concerns ruled the day. How many people remember that? Okay, that was something, wasn't it? If your last name started with a G, you got 6 gallons of gas on Thursday afternoon, and if your car required 7, you were pretty much out of luck. It really caused some great concern to us in America, and it was an eye-opening experience. Taught us a lesson. 1978, the first federal solar tax credit came about. How many people remember that? Okay, so there's some old-timers in here. No offense. Okay. First solar credit was 40%. Okay. Let's see how that impacted the United States. 1980, there was 233 solar manufacturers in the United States, due in large part to the enactment of the initial 40% solar tax credit. So we went from about 7 or 8, okay, up to about 233. Okay, this is why I think I was invited to the panel. Let me just see a show of hands. How many people have been in the solar industry longer than 2 years? Okay, a vast majority. How about longer than 10 years? Okay, it's starting to narrow down a little bit. Most of the people I recognize. How about 20 years? Now I recognize everyone. How about 30 years? You see 3 hands, 4 hands. Okay, how about 37 years? Okay, that is why I am here. I'm the old timer. You know, we've actually been in business in Daytona Beach installing solar equipment since 1975 in our 37th year. That doesn't mean we're experts, it just means we're very, very experienced. But it also goes to show the folks that had their hands up for the 20 and 30 years, you know, if you think the Navy SEALs, the Marine Recons, and the Army Rangers are tough, take a look at these folks. They've ridden the wave, incredible diversity through the years, and we're going to talk about where we came from the initial tax credit, how solar grew, how it collapsed, and how it grew again to the point that we enjoy today. We're also going to talk about where we're going to go to make sure this momentum is not lost. Okay, so 1985, the federal tax credit was to be gradually reduced. Okay, it was supposed to get down 10% each year. This is one of the moments that I will never forget. Just before Christmas, when the Congress was getting ready to adjourn, and we were looking forward to the credits being reduced by 30%, then 20%, 10%, and eventually being, weeded out to zero. We felt that at the time, that the stability of the industry would carry it from that point on, because there was a tremendous amount of solar being installed in. Well, we all know how Congress works, and it worked the same way at this point. Christmas came, Christmas went, the solar tax credit died, and with it, the plummeting of the solar industry. When I say cataclysmic, I mean, there's only 2 or 3 people in this room that really were in the business at that time that felt it, and they're true survivors. So what happened? Well, in 1990, remember we had 233 solar manufacturers? It dropped down to 51. In the year 2000, it dropped down to 26. See the direction this is going? Now, when you talk about solar, in my opinion, you talk about mom, apple pie. I mean, there's nothing cleaner and more beneficial in my mind, to America's energy mix is solar. It comes up every day. Doesn't cost anything to utilize it. We need to be doing that. How many people in here agree with that? Can we have a round of applause to those who agree? There's only one person that applaud. Okay, so moving forward, in 2006, the federal solar tax credit was reinstated at 30%, and Florida develops a solar rebate program. This was a game changer, okay? All of a sudden, consumers were really without any marketing dollars, consumers were educated just by word of mouth. Hey, look at this is what's happening, solar is good, and all of a sudden the momentum was built. 2009, remember we went from 26, now we're back up to 88 solar manufacturers. Solar is rapidly being deployed around the world. Okay. 2011, and this is from our friends at SPI, they're just the report that just came out. Over 100,000 solar workers in the United States, more than double the estimated employment in 2009. These workers are employed at 5,600 businesses operating at over 6,500 locations in every state of the Union. The increased value of solar installations is breathing life into the U.S. economy. In 2011, solar installations were valued at $8.4 billion compared to $6 billion just 1 year earlier. 2012 first quarter solar electric capacity increases 85% over the same quarter a year earlier. Is that tremendous growth? We're heading the right direction, aren't we, folks? This is exciting stuff. 2012, solar development represents the ideal mechanism for job creation and economic recovery for our nation. How many people agree with that statement? Okay, so with all the good news, where does Florida stand in this equation? Well, Florida ranks a disappointing 14th in the nation behind Oregon in installed solar capacity. What we want to do now is hear from our panel about how we can move our state to the #1 spot that we deserve. I would like to introduce Patrick Sheehan.
Oh, technology and I don't mix. There we go. Well, Bill's done a great job of setting up the question for the day. He's also done a great job putting me on first, because I just have to get on to first base. The next speaker will come on to second, and then we all know who's going to be the home run hitter on this panel. So you guys have been well attended to by our host, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. First of all, I'd just like to extend Commissioner Putnam, who I work for, thanks to all of you for what you are doing as entrepreneurs to try to grow the economy of not only this state, because I assume most of you are from this state. I'd be curious to know how many of you are from out of the state and looking maybe to come to the state. How many of you, let's just start that way, how many of you are from Florida, currently working in Florida? Roughly 50%. How many are thinking about doing business in Florida? Slightly smaller crowd, yeah. Well, we want to see your business come here, and that's the bottom line. We want to see the opportunities that you all have invested your time, your sweat equity, your creativity, your entrepreneurial skills into for a number of years, as we just seen, flourish. And as you probably heard my boss talk about when he has a chance to talk about energy, his goal is to ensure that Florida can be a trendsetter when it comes to sort of the off-quoted, off-described, but maybe not off-analyzed phrase, all of the above strategy. And for us, I think it has particular resonance in Florida, and has had for this past year that the commissioner has owned the portfolio, if you will, and has taken on the responsibility of leading the Office of Energy. It's taken on particular resonance here for us because of the unique characteristics of Florida. As a peninsula, we obviously know that we're bringing in most of our fuel from out of state, whether we're talking about transportation-based fuels or we're talking about fuel sources to provide for electric generation. And one of the first things the commissioner tried to do when he took on this portfolio was do a sort of overarching assessment of where we stand, how we got here, and what our mission statement was going to be for the foreseeable future, and going beyond just the foreseeable future, long into the future, because this is a commitment that he personally is making, a responsibility he's taking very seriously, and doesn't expect to see this office continue to be kicked around the state government from one office or one division to another. We found a home, and we're going to be here for a while. So, true to his style, we try to analyze where we are today. And the first thing that jumped out to us as we were trying to craft a mission statement for the office was, it's very clear if you look at the transportation sector, Florida, like the United States, is overwhelmingly dependent on one source of energy. It's one fossil fuel. We don't have it here. We have to import all of it from outside of the United States or from outside of our state. When it comes to the United States, we have to import about 60% of it from other countries. If you look in terms of electric generation, we know that we're importing about 56% now of our electric generation comes from natural gas, about 14% from nuclear, 25% from coal, and that little sliver, about 2%, is coming from renewables. That's based on a couple-year-old data from EIA, the Energy Information Administration, a very reliable source. But we haven't seen much change since that document came out. In fact, when you look at what the 10-year site plans of our utilities are putting out, we see that some are predicting that their dependence on natural gas for electric generation is going to grow into the 70s. And that's very near future stuff. So the question becomes, we already know that in one critical sector of energy, we are overly dependent on one source of fuel. We know that we're dependent in a precarious way, in that we have to send hard-earned dollars from Florida out of state, and we have to send hard-earned dollars in the United States out of country. We spend $70 billion in the state of Florida on energy. That's the same amount of money we spend on the state government to currently run our state. And if you take that as a per capita formula and you look at 19 million Floridians, we're spending about $3,500 a Floridian on energy. A third to, according to some forecasts, 50% of that goes straight out of state. Hardly any of it, of that group, if it's a third or a half, actually resides in Florida. The other amount, whatever that may be, 2/3 or half, at least goes through some hands in Florida and is retained at some percentage. That's a significant amount of money that goes out of state. And so one of the first things that the commissioner thought about was, we have got to address this issue of where we are today in terms of over-dependence on out-of-state, out-of-country fuel sources, and then we have to look to the future. I mean, statutorily, my office, the commissioner's responsibility is to look 10, 15, 25 years down the road. That's what the legislature in their wisdom asked us to do, and that's what we're trying to do. So you probably heard it before, but it bears repeating. The mission statement that the commissioner has laid out for our office is pretty simple. It's 3 words. We need to make sure that we provide for stable, reliable, and diversified energy sources and supplies for Florida. We need to look at how we can grow some of those energy supplies here at home. We need to become less dependent on other states. We need to become less dependent on other countries. For us here, that you know, no surprise to you, in his seat as the Commissioner of Agriculture, he knows very well what our farmers can do, what the 48,000 mid to large-sized farmers want to do, how they want to maximize the utilization of the land. And of course, he looks at bioenergy as one key way to diversify the portfolio. But he's also looking at the fact that we have entrepreneurs like you in this other field that makes a lot of sense in a state like ours that does have an enormous amount of sunshine. And obviously is sort of, you know, it doesn't take much of a rocket scientist to figure out that you could expect that Florida will continue to enjoy that kind of level of sunshine and should be an area where solar power should flourish. So we have a mission statement now. Now we have to put it into effect. And the first thing we did was try to deal with the political realities. And the political realities in Florida have been mixed. They have been frustrating for many of you. They have been frustrating for the commissioner. They've been frustrating for a lot of legislators. And I think that's why they ended up putting the responsibility in his hands for at least the foreseeable future to see what he could do with this issue. And true to form, he didn't want to sit on his laurels. He didn't want to sit back and just look at the matter. He wanted to act immediately. But the goal of acting immediately was to put forward some proposals that were broad in nature, that looked at everything from regulatory reform to tax incentives to practical economic growth opportunities, not necessarily tackle every issue within these stovepipes, if you will, but look across the spectrum of issues that we're facing, because there are many, and figure out a way to start putting markers out, saying, here's what we want to do. Here's how we want to meet that mission statement for Florida. Here's how we want to be more diversified. Here's how we want to get to that all-of-the-above strategy. Here's how we want to be technology neutral, if you will, and allow the marketplace to help drive as much as we can in this admittedly very regulated marketplace, help allow the spirit of entrepreneurship in the market to help push new ideas, new innovations, new progress, which you all have enjoyed quite a bit in the solar arena all over the world. And so with these goals in mind, he put forward 11 proposals in front of the state legislature last year, and I hope many of you followed that and are aware of the fact that we were successful, we think, in getting an energy bill almost unanimously through the Senate and the House, and ultimately the governor allowed it to become law. And we now have, and can point to the first energy law that Florida has passed in the last 4 years. Now, it's not revolutionary. It hasn't solved every issue. But as the commissioner would tell you if he was here, the first goal was to say to the legislators, to say to the stakeholders, we can bring the band together. We can bring everybody together and start looking at this and say, we've over-politicized it at times. We have put our hands in our fingers in our ears and said, I don't want to listen to you anymore when we're talking to opponents. And say that the time is to kind of start afresh and start looking at what we can do. If we have to start with baby steps, we'll start with baby steps. So our characterization of that bill is, it's a first start. It's a first stake in the uphill battle that we know we have as a state to get to these goals of having stable, reliable, and diversified energy sources. Solar is going to be a key part of that. And one of the ways so far that we have contributed to that, I think, and want to contribute to that, is to be good stewards of the dollars that we have had entrusted to us. You probably know that the federal stimulus dollars that came to Florida were significant. We had $175 million from the federal ARA, American Recovery Act, programs directed just towards energy projects. And our office has maintained that portfolio for about 4 years. And I think we've done a pretty good job working with our grantees, over 150 grantees across the state, to try to get some real return on investment, to try to get some real progress in a variety of areas where these grants reside. 27 of those particular grants have significant solar components, and they range from, you know, the city of Bartow, who decided to power the public library with solar PV system. Federal stimulus dollars helped to do that. The city of St. Pete Beach, which used solar thermal water heating to take care of their heating needs in their firehouse, their police station, and now because of the success they enjoyed there, are becoming a little bit more ambitious and looking at doing solar lighting in their public park, to some very large projects. And some of the panelists and I were talking about offline before we got here and got up on stage, and that's the $10 million Sun Smart Schools initiative that we are proud to partner with FSEC and UCF and Dr. Fenton and his crew to roll out over the next couple of years, and we're making great headway there. That program essentially will allow 90 to 100 public schools throughout the state of Florida to have solar systems established, PV systems at those schools, so that they can take care of some of their power needs, so that they can build in an educational component and help the kids understand more about energy and how energy is developed, and alternative energy and the role alternative energy can play today and into their futures when they take on the mantle of public policy making. And then it has a very real energy assurance component, because these schools are playing vital roles as your emergency shelters during the all too frequent storms and hurricanes and other kind of natural and man-made disasters that we often face here. So a lot of goodness can come from a project like this, and I think right now we're at about 75 schools that have begun these projects. It is one of the largest grants that the Department of Agriculture maintains. We're very proud of it. We want to see it all the way through to completion. And I think then the next question that obviously comes up, and one that we'll probably get into in Q&A, is what's next? The federal stimulus dollars aren't coming back. It doesn't look like it. I guess we'll see what happens after November. Maybe we'll have a new round. But we have to assume that we're not going to enjoy that level of investment from the federal government. Do we just stop and say, Craig, it's 4 years, we're done? No. And my basic message to you is, while we don't have all the answers now, the commissioner's not that type of public official. That's not his style, that's not what he's going to do. This first bill was one step in a lot of steps to keep moving forward to our goals. We need to hear more from you all. We need to do a better job listening to you all so that we can understand what we can do and how we can start to build, perhaps in that same tactical way of incrementally moving forward, so that we can keep as many of the stakeholders together, so that we can get to where we were at least able to get in the initial step this past legislative session. But fundamentally, you should know that the commissioner's goal is to work with all technologies, all sectors, to find ways to get to that all of the above strategy that he has articulated, and obviously a number of other public officials have talked about. But for us, solar has a unique resonance, just like bioenergy, because it can be something that Florida can grow here, take advantage of here, and add to our efforts to lessen our dependence on trucking in or piping in more natural gas, or bringing in fossil fuels from some other place that brings all sorts of other issues about reliability and stability. So we have made a good start. It's a small start. The next question is, how do we get forward? And I will tease you with one or two ideas, I guess, and then we'll get into the Q&A. I think something that you can expect from us is to look first and foremost at how we can address regulatory barriers that may be, as they would say, quote unquote, the low-hanging fruit. How do we find those regulatory barriers that might be preventing a advertising company that has billboards that is powered by solar to sort of deal with the multi-jurisdictions they have to go through when they work throughout the state? We'd like to look at that. We'd like to see if we can help kind of clarify that, maybe have a standard so that that business in particular can thrive and doesn't have to deal with those kind of regulations unnecessarily. We want to look at long-term solutions. We want to look at putting more money into R&D, whether it's state dollars or try to capitalize on federal dollars that may not be in the order of the federal stimulus program, but are out there nonetheless. And one of our initiatives most recently was to partner with the U.S. Navy out of Jacksonville, SAF batteries out of Jacksonville, and look at applying for and then ultimately applying collectively as a triumvirate for some dollars from the feds to do utility scale storage demonstration. You all know, you don't need me to tell you, that utility scale storage in particular, and the advances we can make there are going to mean so much to the solar industry. in terms of your competitiveness and your ability to reach the grid parity, not just maybe at peak, but even off-peak, of course. We've got talented staff. We've got some staff who are going to be here all week. I won't be here all week, I'm sorry to say. I'm going to miss the president's speech. I'm sure you all will enjoy that. But one of my staffers, who is my key expert on all things alternative energy and solar, is here, John Leeds. John, I think you haven't gotten too bored and disappeared. There he is back there waving. John is manning a booth, and I want to thank Bruce Kershner for allowing us to have a booth here. We're going to be here tucked away in the corner, but what I invite you to do is use that opportunity while you're walking around this week to go see John, talk to us about those things that you think we can tackle. We're going to be honest with you, we're going to be realistic, very much in the mode of what we did last year. We're not going to be revolutionary tomorrow, we're going to take it and try to move forward together and keep as many of the stakeholders together as we can, but we're not afraid to take on and listen to any issue. So please come to us with your ideas. And I look forward to talking to you about that a little bit in the Q&A. Let me turn it over to our batter number 2 here, who's going to get us further around the basics. Thank you all.
Thank you, Patrick. Great job. I'd like to welcome Mr. Joe Pietrzak, Progress Energy.
All right, we're off to a great start.
Well, I have to back out.
Let's just try it this way.
You want to close from there?
Go down the bottom.
All right, it's a close one. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Pietrzak, and I'm with Progress Energy. I'm the solar program manager for the SunSense programs in Florida. And I just wanted to take a minute to tell you a little bit about Progress Energy Florida. We, back on July 2nd, Duke Energy completed a merger with Progress Energy, and we're now one company. We serve 7.1 million customers in 6 states and serve over 100,000 square miles of service territory. But for today's presentation, I'm just going to be talking about Florida. And we've been in Florida for about 100 years. Our headquarters is in St. Petersburg. We serve 1.6 million customers in 35 different counties. And we've actually have a long and proud tradition of doing energy efficiency in the state of Florida. Progress Energy's been in energy efficiency since 1981. During that time, some of the highlights include that we've saved our customers over $1.25 billion in energy cost. We saved 1,645 megawatts of energy, which gave us the ability not to build 17 peaker power plants. And just for anybody that's not familiar with Progress Energy Florida, we're actually a winter peaking company, which means that we set the most generation need is on the coldest day of the year, only for a few hours each year. So instead of having to build that plant just for a few hours each year, through energy efficiency and demand response, we've been able to eliminate the need for 17 peaker plants, which is the equivalent of taking 1.95 million cars off the roads. So we have these programs that are available for all of our customers, and subsequently, in 2011, We received approval from the Florida Public Service Commission to expand upon those programs. And we actually started 5 new pilot programs under the SunSense umbrella. Those pilot programs will go from 2011 through 2014, and they mainly focus on solar PV and solar water heating. There's a solar for schools component, a residential photovoltaic component, a commercial photovoltaic incentive, solar water heater for affordable housing, and solar water heating with energy demand. And I'm going to talk about each one of those programs throughout my presentation. The first of those programs is the SunSense Solar Water Heating Program. And this program is very innovative in the fact that it combines the energy efficiency of solar water heating along with a demand response program. So the customers save the kilowatt hours from installing the solar water heater, but as a utility, we're able to reduce that demand, not build that peak power plant with that combination. It requires that the customer sign up for a 3-year commitment to our demand response programs. In turn, they get a $550 credit on their electric bill, plus an ongoing credit of $60 per year. The application process is all online, and to ensure that those water heaters are going on energy efficiency homes, we require that the customer completes a home energy check before the solar water heater is installed. We also have a program that really deals with affordable housing. There's a lot of Progress Energy has a strong commitment to the community, and we work with a lot of nonprofit builders throughout the state. And one of the things that you really have to be concerned with is once a customer gets into one of these homes, every month for the rest of the life of that house, they're going to have a utility bill. So by partnering with the builders while the home is being constructed, we deal with the life cycle costs of the house. And we partner with a number of nonprofits where we're putting these solar water heating systems on the homes while they're being constructed. And it's turned out to be a great combination. We're getting a lot of good feedback from the communities. Next is our residential customer-based PV incentive program. And this is a direct incentives that goes directly to the customer. It's $2 per watt for the first 10 kW DC of PV that they install. And Progress Energy has made a significant increase to our incentives this year. We started off offering $1 million in incentives, and this year we'll be offering $1.9 million. It requires an online reservation prior to the customer getting approved for the rebate. This guarantees that those funds are available once the system's installed. Again, we require that home energy check so that we can ensure that these PV systems are going on energy efficiency homes and being used in the most efficient way possible. It's proved to be very popular with our customers, and we've really had a good, strong response from the solar community also. Our next launch for the program is October 1st at 10 a.m. Similar to our residential program, we also have a commercial program, and this program is similar, only there's a tiered incentive structure. It's $2 per watt for the first 10 kW, then it's $1.50 a watt for the next 40, and $1 for the remaining 50 kW. So a customer can get an incentive for up to a 100 kW system. We've increased the incentive amount on this program also. We went from $1 million last year to $1.3 million this year. Again, we require that online reservation so that the customer is guaranteed that incentive once the system's installed. And we also require a business energy check to make sure that those systems are installed on energy efficiency businesses. And our launch again will be October 1st this year. Going off of what Patrick was mentioning about the stage program, Progress Energy has piggybacked off of that program to where we are installing PV systems on emergency shelters. Last year we did 9 schools, 9 K through 12 schools, and 1 large post-secondary school. And our goal is to do 10 schools per year. We have another 10 schools committed for this year that are getting ready to be built. And this year our post-secondary school will be UCF. But it really involves not just putting a tangible project on the ground, but the educational component. So there's a curriculum that goes along with it. The students can monitor the energy production, they can do mathematical computations or scientific experiments, and they're able to see the production of that PV system right there in their backyard. But in the worst, if there is a scenario where the grid was to go down, these systems also provide backup power for minimal loads for a day or so that the community can use these schools as a place to go during an emergency. And we've really been doing PV on schools since 2002. Last year, at the end of the year, we had PV systems on 28 schools. By the end of this year, it'll be 39. And then 11 schools each year going forward. So we really think that combining the PV with the educational component takes it a long way. It takes it just further than the classroom, but puts it in that student's life. We also have a number of solar purchase power agreements. And separate from the retail and commercial SunSense programs that we just discussed, we also have the contracts with 3 different solar developers. These are all tariff-based contracts that fall underneath the Florida Public Service Commission's rules for QFs, or qualifying facilities. We remain committed to seeking out the most cost-effective renewables to serve our customers in the future. However, we know that this includes a collaboration approach, including conservation and energy efficiency programs that modernize our existing resources and alternative energy. We're encouraged to see the interest of these activities in this area, and we look forward to these projects being completed. And with that, I'd just like to, if you'd like more information on our programs, you can go to our website. But I'd like to also point out, this is a 1.2 megawatt system installation. This particular customer participated in our commercial photovoltaic incentive program last year. And they're located probably less than 2 miles from here, and happens to be the Darden headquarters. And they are the largest net metered customer on our service territory. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Great job. We're all excited to hear about the expansion of your program. I know all the contractors out there have a big smile on their face, and that means we're able to help more customers. Bruce Kershner.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome I know most of the folks in here are from Florida, but when Bill asked for a show of hands, I know we have a lot of folks from out of the state, and I want to, on behalf of FlaSEIA, welcome those to Florida and to SPI-12. We're very excited about having SPI here this year. We've been looking forward to having SPI come here for a little while now, and now it's reality, and we get to really showcase the solar industry to our policymakers here in the state of Florida. And very fortunate to have Patrick here, and glad that you could join us, and I know you're going to be taking a tour of the floor here pretty soon, and I think it's going to be an eye-opening experience. I know John's already been out there on the floor, and I'm sure he can attest to the fact that this is quite a show. Let me just start by telling you a little bit about FlaSEIA. We are a nonprofit trade association. We were founded back in 1977. We have a broad membership, and we represent all of our members in Tallahassee in front of the legislature, as well as the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, the Office of Energy, Department of Business Professional Regulation, and the Public Service Commission. So these are kind of the very important aspect to what we do at FlaSEIA for our members. We also have a component that we believe very helpful to the consumer. We have a hotline, an 800 number. We do get a lot of phone calls from consumers. And one of the things that I'll tell you that I think is a little bit unique about FlaSEIA, when you take a look at our membership, especially from the contractor standpoint, you see that I have the Department of Business Professional Regulation mentioned here, is because here in the state of Florida, our contractors are very heavily regulated. General contractors, plumbers, electricians, solar contractors, and some more. And it's because of that regulation that we felt at FlaSEIA that part of our vetting of our contractor members is that we ensure that all of our contractor members are properly licensed to do the type of technology that they have described in their application, as well as making sure that they have workers' compensation. And this gives some assurance to any consumer here in Florida that is dealing with a FlaSEIA contractor member, that they know that they're dealing with a properly licensed contractor that has insurance. And we think that's very important to go through that vetting process. And we also have an ethics committee, and it's an active committee, and we do hear complaints from time to time, and the committee deals with those. So that was just a little bit about FlaSEIA, and some of this we've touched on already with some of the other speakers. We have enough solar energy falling on Florida in one day to power the state for 1 year. So when you stop and you think about that, that's a pretty awesome statement. 85% of the maximum PV potential of any place in the country. So we do have the potential here in Florida for PV. And that's one of the other things before I get too far into the program. A little bit about our members. Just like Bill Ballagher here, Mr. Gallagher's company is a small company. I'm not real sure how many employees you have today, but probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30. Less than that now. Well, okay, we'll talk about the reason why it's less than that now. But anyway, mainly these are small companies, and they're basically boots on the rooftop, if you will. These folks are installing both PV as well as thermal, solar water heating. And so this is, having a good energy policy here in the state is very important to our members because they want to be able to build a good business model. And I'm going to talk about a little bit more about the history of solar, and you'll probably see a little frustration that we've had within the industry of starting and stopping with various different policies. So just as setting this up. It was almost like Patrick was reading my mind because I came up here with a slide about what it's going to take to grow the solar industry in Florida. And one of them is, of course, removing barriers. And Patrick touched on that. And I'm going to go ahead and get to the next slide. Basically, what Patrick was referring to is the permitting process that we have to go through here in the state of Florida for systems. We have 67 counties and over 400 cities. They all don't have building departments, but the vast majority of them do. And the problem that we see within our industry here in Florida is very different permitting fees, different types of application process that you have to go through. Some jurisdictions are much slower in their turnaround when the contractor makes their application. The variations, like I said, across the state varies widely. The permitting fees I've already touched on. You may have a particular system in Central Florida with a building department that costs, you know, one number, but by the time you take that same system and try to install it in South Florida, it may be 2, 3, 4 times the price. And then, of course, there's unreasonable requests that from time to time certain building departments have. I put ladder up there. We've been informed that we have building departments that say, well, you know, we can't get out there to do the inspection, so we want you to put a ladder and leave a ladder out there. Well, now we're opening up a whole issue of liability in leaving a ladder on a job site. So these are all things that, you know, when we talk about barriers that we are concerned with here in Florida. So we need to figure out a way to try to streamline the solar permitting. The fee should reflect the time needed for the staff to review and issue a permit. That really shouldn't vary that widely when you go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Reduce inspection appointment and arrival windows. Again, we're talking about small contractors here that are dealing mainly with residential owners who may have to have access to their garage or things of this nature. So it's very important that you know, we have reasonable window for these inspections. Simplifying the permitting application. One of the things that FlaSEIA has done over the past several years is try to work with the Building Official Association of Florida to try to figure out a way to actually streamline these forms and come up with standardized fees as well. And I've got a quote here from Tax Watch, goes back a few years. The development and implementation of a uniform state standard with a single permit and application per solar system is to improve and encourage further growth of the solar market. So Florida Tax Watch is kind of the watchdog, if you will, of our state dollars and our resources, and they see the need for this type of streamlining. Bill did a great job of really going back there in history and bringing us forward. And I just want to kind of narrow that history down a little. Policies we have in place, and hopefully maybe what some of those future policies might look like. One of the early issues, of course, was a property tax exemption. It goes back to 1980. It was a constitutional amendment. It was later implemented by the Florida legislature, and it had a sunset date in it of 1990. And it was a pretty effective exemption at the time. Unfortunately, I'm going to follow up on that in a minute here, because all of that has now changed with that particular constitutional amendment. The next one is a sales tax exemption, and I'm very pleased to be able to tell everyone here that FlaSEIA really took this issue on back in 2005. For many years, we had a sales tax exemption on solar materials. We had it for a while, then it went away, then we had to get it, but typically it only lasted for a few years. When 2005 came around, we were facing the sunset again, and we went forward and we asked the legislature to just basically remove that sunset, and in essence making the sales tax exemption permanent. And so I'm very pleased to say that the legislature passed that and the governor signed that in law, and we have a permanent sales tax exemption on all solar equipment. And then we fast forward to 2006 and through 2010. This was the state solar rebate program. Patrick made some reference to that, and of course I've been privileged to listen to the Commissioner many of his speeches, and sometimes I cringed whenever we would get to that part of his presentation, because he really took over a mess when he took over this solar rebate program about a year or so ago now. And I do want to make a comment that, as Patrick has alluded to, the Florida Energy Office has been around for many, many years, but it has been housed in many different state agencies, including the governor's office. And so it's hard to really have a good state energy policy when the energy office itself is constantly being moved around. I'm very pleased that it's at the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services and under the current leadership of Commissioner Putnam. You know, I do feel very good about that. And when the transfer was made, we were actually coming out of the solar rebate program. And just to give you all a little bit of history on the rebate program, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it was a hit right from the very beginning. In 2006, when it was implemented, there was $2.5 million set aside for rebates here in the state of Florida. I know that probably doesn't sound like a lot of money to some of our folks, maybe from some other more progressive states, but $2.5 million at that time, the industry thought was a lot of money. You know, we thought we could really grow our industry. And the bottom line was, by the time we got the rules written and the rebate program actually went into effect and people could actually start making application, we probably had somewhere between 6 to 8 months left in the program for the first year. We used up that $2.5 million the first year and moved forward to the next year. And this was when the economy was a little bit better here in the state of Florida. It was actually able to get another $1 million, so we had $3.5 million the next year. But this is when we found out that there was a pent-up demand here in the state of Florida for solar, because within 6 months, that $3.5 million was gone. The way the legislation was written, the Energy Office hands were tied. They had to continue to take applications, because it was written in such a manner that it was, the rebates were available as long as the legislature funded it. So now we started going down this slippery slope. The next year we got $5 million, but that didn't last but about 3 months, because we were already paying people that was in the queue. Had it not been for the federal stimulus money, we would have really been in bad shape. As it ended up, the folks that got involved in this program at the very end, unfortunately, ended up only getting 52 cents on the dollar. This does not, like I say, reflect on Commissioner Putnam. As he has said in many, many speeches, he had a pile of coat hangers that he had to sort through. And I think it was within 90 days he was able to sort this thing out. He went through, I think, 2 audits, if I remember correctly, Patrick, and then was able to distribute the money. So I think when you take a look at his action on that solar rebate program, that was, you know, that was very commendable on his part. Let me get back now to the property tax exemption. I've got a couple of slides on that, and I'll update you in a few minutes on that. But I did want to just touch briefly on PACE. As many states passed legislation over the years regarding PACE, property assessed clean energy, Florida did the same back in 2010. As you can see, if you look at the timeline, it came at the end of the state rebate program. And this was a piece of legislation that, even though Florida had a fiscally conservative legislature, it was actually the Republican leader in the House that brought this to our attention. and said that, you know, he thought he could pass this because he felt this was the next step that the industry needed to take, that we needed to move away from rebates and into something a little bit different. He felt PACE was a perfect way for us to go. And it was going to take us kind of a bridge from the rebates into PACE. Well, unfortunately, after this passed unanimously in the House and the Senate, and the governor signed it into law, I think it was about 30 days later is when the Fed stepped in, of course, and we all know the history now of PACE. We're you know, not going anywhere, and we have no idea when the federal government's going to take care of this whole issue regarding the mortgages. A little bit about this tax exemption so you can kind of see the dilemma that we're in. In 1980, like I said, we had a constitutional amendment passed and the legislature implemented it. However, in November 2008, we had another ballot initiative. And it was very confusing because it was that very same year that FlaSEIA worked very hard to modify the existing statute and remove the sunset. At the same time, we had another group, the TBRC, Taxation Budget Commission, Review Commission. They were across the street from the Capitol working on a constitutional amendment that no one realized that they were working on. And unfortunately, it got on the ballot and it passed. And what happened with the passage of it was it immediately removed the constitutional amendment from 1980 and the implementing language, so we have no property tax exemption on the books right now because the way it was written, it takes the legislature, the Florida legislature, now to implement that. So, Patrick, I will ask you to take that back to the commissioner that we have tried now for 4 years. Very simple thing is to let's get this property tax exemption back on the books for the state of Florida. I would point out to you that it is limited to residential property only, which is different from the one that was passed in 1980 because that was both commercial and residential. But this would at least help our residential customers if we can get the legislature to implement that. So now we get up to the present, and really the only thing that we have that I can speak to from the present is our FECA solar rebates, and Joe's done a good job from Progress Energy's side of talking about that. FECA stands for the Florida Energy Efficiency Conservation Act, and there's a lot of things involved in that particular act, but a few years ago the Florida legislature passed an amendment to that act that created an enhancement for renewable energy, and in particular solar. And out of that came the solar rebate programs that the investor-owned utilities like Progress Energy participate in. And so this is very important for us here, for our contractors here in the state of Florida. And I'll speak to that in a little bit more detail here. Those of you that are not familiar with the makeup here in Florida, we have 5 investor-owned utilities. Florida Power and Light, Progress Energy, Tampa Electric or TECO, Gulf Power, and then a small Florida public utility company. And we have 2 municipals that also participate in this program, JEA, the Jacksonville, and the Orlando Utilities Commission. And all of this is is on the demand side, management, and our Public Service Commission requires $24.5 million a year for solar pilot programs, and that's been going on for 3 years. Joe, this would be our 4th year we're entering into, I believe.
We actually began in 2011, so
okay. That's right, we did start in 11, right? So anyway, it's a 5-year program. And we have roughly $24.5 million, and you can see this is the breakout of how the money is split up between our different IOUs. And one of the points I want to make, I mean, it looks like, okay, $24.5 million, that sounds like a lot of money, but when you break it down between all the IOUs and then you take a look at all the programs that are all the little buckets of money that are within these programs of each of the IOUs, because they have their solar water heating program, they have their PV program, some of them have school programs, they have marketing and administration. So when you really take a look at how much money the industry really gets, it is going to be less than that $24.5 million. Well, let me just back up before I get off of that. So, as Joe just mentioned, and I want to say this on behalf of FlaSEIA, we are very proud to have Progress Energy as a member of FlaSEIA, and we have enjoyed partnering with Progress Energy over the years in their programs, and you know, we're really looking forward to continuing that relationship with them. They've got a very good program, and how they handle their solar rebate program, you need to be commended on it. You know, we have no complaints from any of our members on yours. Do want to mention, segueing back to Patrick, this last legislative session, this was something that Commissioner Putnam really wanted to accomplish, and that was to pass an energy bill. We had not done that here in the state of Florida for 4 years. And again, I want to commend the Commissioner for getting a bill to the finish line. Though it be a modest bill, you know, I've had conversations with the Commissioner, and, you know, he has told me this is a first step, a foundation to move forward. And so we look forward to continue working with the Commissioner and with the Energy Office and Patrick and his team on building on the success that we had this past legislative session. One of the things that was included in this particular piece of legislation was a study of the FECA program. And so we are in the middle of that right now. I was fortunate enough to be on a FECA focus group here a few weeks ago to have some input on that. So we're looking forward to the report that's going to be given to the Florida House and Senate and the Governor in January on that. So what constitutes an effective renewable energy policy here in Florida? It should be long-term and sustainable so that the consumers and the business owners, as well as the financial entities, can plan and predict results. Like I said, we've had a number of different programs here in the state of Florida over the years. But the problem with all of these programs is they come and they go. They last 3, 4, 5 years. And with nothing that you know, our members at FlaSEIA can really build a business around. You know, the FECA solar rebate programs. Joe, great program, but again, we wait for those launch dates, and then, you know, some of our members get a few jobs, but then we have to wait until the next launch. So it's that kind of you know, atmosphere that we have here in Florida. We're hoping to be able to improve on those. The policy must provide the lowest financial impact on the consumer, and we must result in job creation. What should we be looking for in the future? One of the issues that we brought forward last year that we're hoping that we can continue to have some dialogue on is the possibility of a low-interest loan program, maybe something similar to the PACE program, but basically outside of PACE, because we have the issues with the Federal Housing Authority. So this is an issue that hopefully we can have some more dialogue on. You know, maybe we can also take a look at expanding FECA and doing more through that program. And another program, of course, that we've mentioned over the years has been a public benefit program. And, you know, again, these are programs that maybe we can have an opt-in or an opt-out type of a situation. All of these are ideas that we would love to be able to take to the Commissioner and sit down and have some discussion on, so we can start planning for the future. Back to the FECA docket, you know, if it was expanded, we believe we could create 40,000 new jobs here in Florida, $1.2 billion in wages, $300 million in additional taxes for our government, $500 million for a reduction in unemployment compensation. So it's a win-win situation. This is not money that's going to be leaving the state. This is money that we can actually keep here in the state of Florida. We have utility scale and distributed generation. Joe kind of touched on some of the projects that I think he's involved in with some of the solar developers. Distributed solar generation, primarily that's what the FlaSEIA members are involved in, and we have no problems with utility scale solar. We just want to make sure that we have a good balance between utility scale solar and distributed generation here in Florida. And we pretty much talked about that. Florida should be leading the nation in manufacturing and exporting solar. We are well positioned here in the state of Florida to do that. We have the sunshine, and now we have our ports. And this is an issue that I know I've had conversations with the governor's office on, is trying to attract a manufacturer, a large solar panel manufacturer here to the state of Florida. With the expansion of the Panama Canal, with the expansion of our ports to be able to accept those larger ships, to me, that's a no-brainer. Here we are, we have 20-some odd ports, if I remember correctly. We have a lot of ports here in the state of Florida, and so we could really be able to be attractive to a manufacturer to come to the state of Florida and then to be able to ship to the South Americas, to the Latin America countries, to the Caribbean, and around the world here from Florida. But as I told the governor's office, you know, we have to have a foundation for that manufacturer to be able to sell here in Florida and the Southeast as well. So that's what we need. That's one of the things I think that we need to work on and really look at those opportunities. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close. And with this headline here, this is kind of the headline, hopefully that we're all going to be able to see one day. Florida leads the nation in solar energy development, job growth, and economic recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you very much. Well, folks, we've got time for some questions. How many people would like to ask a question? Let's see a show of hands here. Ah, we got quite a few here. Okay, great. Well, somebody is standing right in front of the mic right now. If you would, please identify yourself and let us know.
I'm Paul Farron from the Energy Store in Hollywood, Florida, and I have so much to say. I hope I don't jump all over the place. I came to Florida in 2006 and took my life savings and put it into a renewable energy business, which is really founded a lot on solar. I'm a solar developer as well, solar lighting and everything. And things were taking off pretty good. But I saw a market that started to flourish around the rebate program immediately atrophy. And now it's to the point where you've got the FECA money, that your $1.2 million, that's not spit. The FPL just had their FECA, second round of FECA. The first time last October it went in 3 minutes. Last time it went in 90 seconds. The appetite for solar in this state is incredible. You've done surveys where 80% of the population is willing to pay extra money on their electric bill to fund a solar program, but the legislature won't do anything about that. All the states where solar is growing have renewable portfolio standards. We can't even talk about that. The legislature, oh my goodness, we couldn't have a renewable portfolio standard in Florida. It can't get by the legislature. Well, we've got to stop and just get fed up with this. Solar, I mean, it's a no-brainer what solar should be doing in the state of Florida. I took my life savings, which I have almost nothing left. I started with 5 employees, it's just me, and I need the government to do something to help us. Prices have come down, the business market is fun, but we still need some support. We're supporting fossil fuels, we're doing other things, but anyway, I didn't even have a question, I just wanted to express my frustration.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Please.
I'd like to know what your thoughts on Feed-In-Tariff would be, because we've seen it very successfully implemented in Gainesville, and Germany is also another perfect example of how effectively implemented Feed-In-Tariff could be tremendous positive impact on the community and not only the job creation but also economic developments. And it's just trying to find out from consumers and how likely is it that we can see it throughout the states rather than just in municipals such as Gainesville, and what can we do to help to make it a reality?
Thank you. One of our panelists like to take that one on?
You're absolutely right that we have the Feed-In-Tariff only in Gainesville. And of course, it's unique, as you pointed out, because it's a municipality, and so GRU is owned by the people of Gainesville, really. It's able to have that independence and make that decision on their own. I think whether or not the Feed-In-Tariff would be universally deployable throughout the state, given that there are only a few areas where the utilities are owned by the cities, and a relatively small segment of our population are served by a localized utility in that way, it remains to be seen. I mean, I would think that if there was an appetite for it, and if it is to grow, if that appetite is to grow, you would see the munis be the first. So if Gainesville gets a track record that Orlando then pays attention to, and then Jacksonville pays attention to, or Tallahassee pays attention to, I think that would be sort of the expected rollout that I would foresee coming about, and then the crescendo of voices might, help to engage in a wider statewide debate about public utilities. Because I think that your point was, how do we go straight from GRU to the whole state? And I don't think you do that. I mean, I think this is the point on a lot of these issues, the point my boss made, which is every time we try to bite off more than we can chew, we get nowhere in the state. Whether it's, RPS, you can politicize it in 5 seconds and it's all over. The incremental approach may frustrate people, but incrementalism doesn't mean that it has to be just nothing. It means you can do what you can get done practically speaking and continue to advance and continue to move forward. So if FIT is the answer, I think you need practically to see more than just Gainesville say it's working for us. There are people in Gainesville who are actively promoted that as political elected officials and then backed away from it. So there's debate even in Gainesville as to whether it works. So I'm not at all challenging the premise. I'm saying I would think, instead of saying why aren't we at the point, or how can we be at the point that Florida can do this universally, look at it in a series of stages, and I would expect that it would make sense to see the municipalities have that ability to be more flexible and attempt something like that in a staged way, and then with more examples of success, you might see a real public policy debate on it statewide.
We have seen a lot of experience, lessons learned from other countries. And out here, even in Hawaii, we have seen very recent development that's very successful. What can we do as a consumer to help to speed up the process of reaching that crescendo, as you mentioned?
Well, I would say that, whether it's a feed-in or incentives, I don't know if there's the right answer there. What we're seeing lately is the trend in solar costs coming way down, which make it more market-based. And the more market-based that the technology gets, that's really the long-term answer.
Yes, with or without. It'd be great if we can see that happening. And I'd be curious to hear everyone's thoughts on this. Oh, no, I'm Susan Sun Nunamaker. I'm with sunisthefuture.net. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Kurt Easton. Excuse me, I'm with Z Footprint, and we're developers. And I wanted to ask why we've given up on the commercial property tax issue. I mean, we're only staying with residential. The commercial market is a market that could be well served if we could reduce costs that include our property taxes.
Well, to answer your question, you know, we didn't really give up on commercial. It was, you know, an unfortunate chain of events, if you will, on how all this came about. And the property tax, the original property tax exemption, like I said, was for both commercial and residential. When the constitutional amendment went on in 2008, it was for residential only. And, you know, I will tell you that FlaSEIA actually tried to, you know, mount a campaign for that not to pass, because we already had, you know, something in, you know, in our Florida statutes that dealt with both commercial and residential. Unfortunately, now to include commercial means we're going to have to go back and do another ballot initiative, either just for commercial or basically go back and redo the one that we passed in 2008 and change it all around and say that it needs to be done for both commercial and residential. And FlaSEIA has looked into that, but it's just very tough to get a ballot initiative here in the state. You've either got to go through the petition signing process, which can be very, very expensive, or, you know, we have to convince the legislature that, you know, maybe it's better to go back and put another ballot initiative out there that would take care of both commercial and residential, because I will tell you that FlaSEIA is a strong supporter of having commercial included.
I would say that the commercial is going to be the one that really generates the job and has the greatest potential for implementation. If we can get that out there, that would be helpful.
Good point.
Thank you.
Hi, Bill Thomas, Young Climate Renewables. Most of what you've discussed here today seems to be heavily skewed and geared towards residential implementation of solar. We heard a little bit about commercial. Obviously, from a jobs initiative, that makes a lot of sense. What role do you see utility scale solar development having here in Florida as you go forward?
Again, really, we see the cost of solar trending down, and which is a great thing because the lower the cost come, the more market-based solution that will be. Our programs currently focus on retail and commercial customer incentives that go directly to them. And, you know, outside of that, we do offer PPAs for solar contractors that would like to participate.
If I can, let me just highlight one aspect. I think it was on the slide that Bruce put up about the bill that we just passed. One of the debates that I think the commissioner had more to say about, because there were more questions about it, was in that set of proposals he put forward to the legislature, he was asking for a renewal of the tax credits that were sunsetting that previous administrations had put forward. And one of them, the production tax credit, you had a slide on that. It really goes to more utility scale. I mean, what it contemplates is a 1 penny per kilowatt produced and sold of electricity from any form of renewable. So that now gives you a little bit more certainty. I know what Bruce is talking about, and I empathize. We want more than just sort of the 4-year, 5-year cycles of certainty. We want 25 years. I mean, again, the legislature told the office I have the honor to direct and the commissioner to direct to look out long term so that you as business people can work on the cycles you're used to. But we're working right now with the current system of how we do things legislatively, and those tend to be 5-year renewals of tax credits. Here's the thing to watch. The governor allowed that legislation to go forward, but he stated very clearly, I'm going to watch specifically this tax credit issue, the production tax credit and installation tax credit that we have that goes really towards fuels. and a sales rebate, which was a smaller component, but all in all, 3 tax incentives measures now available for the next 5 years. You know, the governor's looking, it's pretty clear, for a return on investment that's maybe a year out or maybe less. We're not quite sure. Is that reasonable? Reasonable minds can disagree about that, but we unfortunately have done something that is, I think, productive, but then again, we're right back in that trap that Bruce is talking about, which is we're kind of on the tenterhooks going, how long will it last? It may not even last 5 years. So I'd keep your eye out on that, and I'd really watch that, because when you have PPAs out there with the IOUs, and you have the ability as a generator through solar energy to craft a PPA and sell power, this production tax credit can help. It's not the whole answer, but it's part of your, you know, your accountant's and green eye shades calculations, and it can help. You all need to keep a close eye on it and make sure that it continues to help as long as you can get it to help, and then we need to be able to advance it beyond 5 years as we can make the case for it.
Thank you.
My name is Bill Fareed. I believe you said the Florida energy bill now is about $70 billion a year. Is that correct?
No, the 70 billion figure was how much the state of Florida spends a year on energy.
Correct, correct. And I believe you also said that...
I thought you meant bill, I think legislation, sorry.
Well, the expense to the economy of Florida, and the economy of Florida, I think, is your bailiwick. So $70 billion a year, half of which you said roughly really truly leaves the state, half of it stays within the state. So I would ask that you set a target for how much of that $35 billion, for example, could be captured. It amounts to something like $100 million a day that we ship out of our economy. So I would ask that you speculate on what is a reasonable target for what we could recapture with our own energy supplies.
And I'm not going to evade this because that's easy to do. I'm going to follow the lead of the commissioner, which I think, and this is important, which I think was the kind of underlying approach that he took that helped us get this bill passed, which is he was very clear when folks asked him to either speculate externally in the legislative sessions or internally about targets, that has been part of our problem in Florida. It's been part of the problem outside of our state. When you try to set targets and you don't meet them, you frustrate everybody. And so he used the phrase, I need to manage expectations. And that means if I'm telling you I don't have a magic target because I don't know where we can get, I'm not telling you I don't care. I want to maximize it as far as we can go. But I'm not going to give you a target that people say, see, we told you you can never do it. You can't get to like 20 whatever. You can't get there. So he's very careful to do that. And I think so far in these nascent stages, you know, getting a bill passed in 4 years following that philosophy has helped us. I would be loath to change the philosophy, and I'd probably be out of a job if I did that too. But there's a rationale for his decision purposely not to go back to targets. And different people will disagree on that in both parties. You'll see that all during the debates, and some people have set targets on both sides of the aisle. His target really is maximize as much as we can the energy we can produce here at home. We don't know, and I don't know that we know what that's going to be. It's 2% right now is renewable in terms of electric generation. Could that be 5% in 5 years? I don't know that anybody can really tell you. What we know is we have the opportunity to try to get there, so let's do it. And let's not frustrate ourselves even further by setting targets that will only give fodder to those who want to be skeptics or be in opposition.
All right, thanks. We started a little bit late, so we got time for 2 more questions, please.
Yes, my name's Greg Kuss, solar developer from Columbus, Ohio, looking around outside the state of Ohio for what's available out there. I was wondering, is Florida open for business with third-party ownership? We do a lot of power purchase agreements. We did 5 schools last year where we partner up with a nonprofit and we find people who can harvest the tax credits. Is Florida, has that law been passed, yay or nay? Is that possible to come here and do that?
No. Barrier. Yeah,
Massive area.
it's a tough one, and it goes back to the Supreme Court case here, and I don't remember the year, what was it, 88, something in the 80s, PW Ventures.
Too bad.
Yeah, and it's something that we're well aware of, and it's something that we continue to look at. There's a lot of sentiment on both sides of the aisle. Again, back in Tallahassee, we continue to look at it. It's one that we will have to continue to move towards addressing. We can't ignore it, but it's there. Now, I'm not enough of an expert to tell you if that prevents you from working in certain territories within Florida in that way, but obviously it contemplates the areas that the IOUs operate within.
What about the Supreme Court?
Hold on just a second. Hold on a second.
I was just wondering on that, the Supreme Court, I don't know what that case was.
It's PW Ventures is the name of it, and it goes back, I believe, the late 80s. And it's sort of at this point, it is the dispositive Supreme Court case on establishing the basic rule, if you will, depending on interpretations, that the public utilities are granted by the people a territory within which to operate, and that no other utility can come and operate in that area. Otherwise, it sort of diminishes the idea of allowing them to have a basis or a territory to operate within.
Excuse me for interrupting.
No, that's fine. Excuse me. Maybe.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Galuzak. I'm a student at the University of Southern California. However, I am a Florida resident. Reason going to USC is because I couldn't find a similar program here in Florida. So I'm hopefully looking forward to seeing something like that in the future. I am pleased at the programs that Progress Energy has to educate our children. I think that's definitely an investment in our future, and we'll see real progress because of that. I'd like to know if the state of Florida has entertained the idea of green bonds, where we can have our community investing in our own communities and being able to make something off of that for, personally, but also, build up our communities.
I want to hog the mic, but I guess that one's directed at me as well. Well, as one fellow Pac-12er, I went to the University of Washington. Welcome back to your home on the East Coast. Yes, we have, and in fact, I've got staff right now up at the National Conference of State Energy Offices in Minneapolis, at which a huge component of the discussions is financing mechanisms. And I think for all of you, one acronym to continue to watch, and one that we're trying to investigate very in an in-depth way to see how we can utilize it, is this Qualified Energy Conservation Bonds, the so-called QECBs, which could function like green bonds. I know some states like Connecticut have set up green banks. They've used a variety of streams of money to then go out and make loans, buy down interest and come up with other financial schemes to help sort of propel the green economy. We're looking at how the qualified energy conservation bonds can be implemented here in Florida. Not to bore you too much on all the technical details, but they came out of the TARP legislation early in the President administration's tenure. Florida has not enacted it. We have not done we have not taken the steps we need as a state to put them into action. That can come in one of two ways here. The governor can sign by executive order an order to allow those bonds to be utilized by counties, or the legislature can do that. And of course, with the Office of Energy now moving under the commissioner, we have a consultative role, if not perhaps a more robust role that might be contemplated in managing any program like that. We're looking very carefully at it. There's rumors already out of DC that those bonds could go away if we don't use those bonds. We're talking $190 million worth of money that could go to the counties, the 60-odd counties in Florida, and it would go, as far as we understand, direct to those counties. The big question for us is what happens if some counties don't feel like they can use them and issue bonds out of the counties? Some places, maybe in Southeast Florida, could, but what about rural communities? How can we help? Could we roll it back to Tallahassee, some portion, and do it as a state bond? Those questions, unfortunately, haven't been answered by our counterparts in DC. We're collectively with other states asking for answers so that we don't run afoul of any rules that have either been thought of or may be rolled out later. But to get to your heart of your question, we're very interested in making sure we don't miss an opportunity if there is a way that we can effectively use such a bond mechanism here in Florida. So I appreciate the question. I encourage people to keep their ears out for that QECB bond issue.
Very good. Thanks, everyone in the audience, for the great questions, and thanks to Patrick, Joe, and Bruce for an outstanding job. Let's give them a nice hand. And folks, I really want to express our appreciation for you coming here today to hear the panelists talk. And if you have concerns or issues and you'd like to express them, feel free to contact your legislators and let them know how you feel. Thanks, folks. Enjoy the show.